previous year. That's huge, isn't it? The New York State Attorney General has warned consumers about a scheme targeting people with Chinese last names, which is a phenomenon familiar to New Zealand, in which the caller purports to be from the Chinese consulate. It's a robot and demands money. And since December, the New York Police Department says 21 Chinese immigrants have lost a total of $2.5 million.
Wow.
That's sad.
Which is a huge amount of money.
It's a lot of money.
I mean, for each immigrant there, they're losing, large amounts of money.
Handing it over. Native American headdresses, moko taken out of context, are objected to. So should religious appropriation be any different? You've probably seen footage of the costumes the stars wore to the Met Gala.
Yes.
Yes. Sunday best was the dress code, but the theme in one of the galleries was heavenly bodies, fashion, and the Catholic imagination. So here's a typical part of the outcry here. If the Met Gala was Islam or Jewish themed, all hell would break loose. So why was it okay for a bunch of flashing celebrities to disrespect my religion? Rihanna came as a silver pope, and Jennifer Lopez had a jewel-encrusted big multicoloured cross, and Kim Kardashian had lots of crosses. Was it OTT and offensive, do you think, or is it 2018?
That outcry is Piers Morgan, isn't it?
Oh, it's not just, admittedly. Well, I'm about to make...
Well, he's a one-man
No,
outrage.
but I'm about to make the point he made, but it's not just him.
Well, I mean, as I understand it, the Vatican did give permission
Yes,
for
but
the theme.
did they know what was in store, I suppose?
Well, I think you would have to be fairly out of touch not to have suspected the Met Ball would be a lot of celebrities wearing dresses. I mean, that's what the Met Ball is.
Yeah.
I can understand the outcry. I think probably because of the moko and the native Indian headdress. But I'm struggling to think whether I would have more concern if it was one person who turned up like that, or whether by being in a group it's not as bad. I don't know. I'm not a religious person, so I couldn't speak on that. But I can understand why there's been outcry.
The point made by Piers Morgan in the Daily Mail is that when Utah teenager Keziah Dom wore a Chinese-style prom dress to a prom, there was social media anger against cultural appropriation, and he's used that as the example, and he's saying, what's the difference when it comes to Christians and Catholics in particular?
Well, you see, I would say that social media outrage was completely out of step, and to me is nothing better than bullying of a child. I mean, she's only 18.
Yeah. To go with that, a portrait of Theresa May, removed from Oxford University after protests by students. It was on the wall of her old geography department as part of a celebration of female alumni. Students complained she was a contentious figure in a department with many EU citizens and decolonial scholars. And so the university took it down to avoid trouble, is the honest answer. And it's slightly confusing, but it may go back up again.
See, this is one where I think we get a little bit, is it faux outrage? I'm not sure that's the right term, but it's where sometimes we get a little bit too precious over things. That's an example of one, I think.
I think there's a new thing called e-outrage, which is just time-rich people on Twitter.
Nothing better to do.
You've got to be time-rich to be on Twitter, don't you?
I'll close that.
Joe McCarroll, thank you for being on the panel today. Scott Campbell, you too. Thanks, everybody, and we're back tomorrow. Checkpoint coming right up.
Ko te mairai, hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere hei kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint, everyone. Tonight, Auckland's Britomart train station is closed full stop after a train derailment. Caught in no man's land, the couple who bought a home thinking it had been EQC fixed, because that's what EQC said. What happens when you have a mortgage or repair bill of more than $200,000 and nobody taking responsibility? Also tonight, a third trial for Malcolm Rewa. We'll have the details. US President Donald Trump quits the Iran nuclear deal. The government hikes foreign aid by just over $700 million over the next 4 years. Where will it go? And work is underway to head off a near certain failure of the school payroll system, Novopay. A big checkpoint coming up after Anna with the news.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. I'm Anna Thomas. Thousands of Aucklanders are facing major disruptions as they head home tonight with the central city's only train station out of action. All services through Britomart ground to a halt this morning after 3 carriages came off the tracks. Trains tonight will be running from further out, with Eastern Line services leaving from the Strand and Western and Southern Line services from Newmarket. Auckland Transport spokesperson James Ireland says about 15,000 commuters use the trains at rush hour, so other public transport will be busy tonight.
So we are putting on some replacement buses between Britomart and the Strand for people who would usually catch the Eastern Line bus services, and Western and Southern Line services will depart from Newmarket. So there will also be replacement buses from Britomart to Newmarket, but they will be very busy.
James Ireland says they expect Britomart to remain closed tomorrow morning, so people should prepare for that also. Serial rapist Malcolm Rewa will face a 3rd murder trial over the 1992 killing of Susan Burdett. Rewa was eventually sentenced to 22 years in prison for the rape of more than 20 women, but 2 juries could not decide whether he was guilty of murdering Ms Burdett. A stay of proceedings was issued 20 years ago. Here's Edward Gay.
Following Taina Porter's full acquittal for the murder in 2015, the Attorney-General decided to recommence proceedings against Rewa for a 3rd time. Rewa's lawyer challenged that decision. In a ruling released today, the Chief High Court Judge, Justice Venning, said it was up to the Attorney-General to grant and lift stays, and while the court could review the decision, it had declined to do so in the Rewa case. Rewa's due to stand trial in February next year. I Tamaki Makoto ko Edward Gay aho.
The head of the Earthquake Commission says it can't help when homes sold with earthquake damage that it missed or poorly repaired need remediation work of over $100,000. Sid Miller spoke to Checkpoint after a meeting between the EQC and a disgruntled Canterbury homeowner. Georgina Hannafin bought her home in 2013 with EQC paperwork stating all repairs were finished, but the initial scope missed damage. And her private insurer Vero said some of the repairs were so substandard that EQC alone must deal with them. Ms Hannafin says she now has a $300,000 mortgage on a quake-damaged home worth considerably less than that. She says it was EQC's mistake and the Commission should repair it in full. But Mr Miller says if the cost is greater than $100,000, it can't. Checkpoint is investigating the issue of what's being called on-salt after the news. There has been European condemnation of US President Donald Trump's decision to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. France, Germany and the UK say they remain committed to the accord, and the EU's foreign policy chief described the deal as working and preventing the country from getting nuclear weapons. Our correspondent Paul Barber reports.
Moments after Donald Trump finished his address at the White House, British Prime Minister Theresa May, President Emmanuel Macron of France and Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel released a joint statement saying his decision to withdraw from the deal was a matter of regret and concern. It said they're committed to the JCPOA, which remains important for shared security and was unanimously endorsed by the UN Security Council. They urged all sides to remain committed to its full implementation and to act in a spirit of responsibility. Meanwhile, the European Union's foreign policy chief Federica Mogherini told reporters that the agreement with Tehran was the culmination of 12 years of diplomacy and that it was working.
Paul Barber in London. Work is underway to prevent the anticipated failure of the Novopay school payroll system after the end of next year. A business case shows Education Payroll Limited warned the previous government in 2016 that the online system for Novopay needs replacing. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The business case obtained under the Official Information Act by the IT news service Reseller News says Novopay Online is impossible to maintain or improve, and from 2020 failure will be almost inevitable. Education Payroll told RNZ News the problem will be fixed before the December 2019 deadline. The business case also says Novopay requires 13,000 manual entries every fortnight and it needs to become fully online. The Principals Federation says that makes people nervous given the problems that dogged Novopay when it was launched in 2012. Ko John Gerritsen, TNA.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is downplaying differences between her ministers over making te reo Māori compulsory in schools. Te reo is to be available in all primary schools by 2025, but the Māori Development Minister, Nanaia Mahuta, says it will eventually be compulsory. New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters has chastised Ms Mahuta, saying she should ensure her views not portrayed as current policy. Ms Ardern says all her ministers are on the same page.
What my ministers were talking about is our position in the future. Right now, we simply do not have enough te reo teachers to even have that aspiration. That's why we're focused on universal availability and training the teachers we need.
Jacinda Ardern says she's comfortable with Mr Peters' comment, saying all her ministers are used to robust exchanges. It's 5:06. The All Blacks midfielder Sonny Bill Williams will return to Super Rugby for the Blues in a match which may decide his All Black selection hopes. Williams suffered a fractured wrist 8 weeks ago and has been named to start at second 5 against the Hurricanes in Auckland on Friday night. He'll line up against Ngani Novopay, his direct competition for All Black starting berth in the upcoming series against France in June. All Blacks halfback TJ Perenara has been named in the Hurricanes reserves, not having played since early last month due to a knee injury. The New Zealand sailor Blair Tuke says it was nice to get one over his Olympic and America's Cup teammate Peter Burling in the Volvo Ocean Race. Tuke's teammate Map Free claimed a thrilling come-from-behind win to take the latest leg from Brazil to Newport in Rhode Island. Map Free had been in 5th place with 300 miles to go on the 6,000 nautical mile leg. However, they caught their rivals on the final day and overcame light winds and fog to be first into port and retake the overall race lead. Tuke says Burling from Team Brunel had some choice words when they met up on shore.
Yes, Sidi Tinny, I can't say the next word, but yeah, it is what it is. Yacht racing's never over till it's over, everyone knows that, and when the opportunities came this time we took them, which was great for us, but they're sailing really well. They're going to be a threat coming into the race, I think, with the sort of form they're showing.
Blair Tuke. The Houston Rockets have advanced to the Western Conference NBA basketball finals, winning Game 5 of the playoff match against the Utah Jazz, 112-102 to take the series 4-1. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a window on the world of reflection, a collection of interviews with folk pondering their image in a mirror. Be careful you don't fall in and drown. And this week's sofa session, the laid-back but well-crafted pop of Hans Puckett, which sounds like this. Take my hand and drive this dagger in, straight to my heart.
And unlike Brian, I can't tell you exactly what we're up to because it's an ever-changing landscape as we head towards 10 p.m. I do know we'll wrap up the day's news in the long bulletin at 10, and I'll be talking to newsmakers from around the country with an eye on international events from the foreign desk. That's Lately with Karen Hay, live between 10 and 11 weeknights on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For all of the North Island, mainly fine, but some cloudy areas tomorrow with the odd shower north of Taupo and also about Kapiti and Wellington. Nelson and Bulla fine with cloud increasing tomorrow and a few showers developing. Westland and Fiordland mostly fine, but occasional rain tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland high cloud tomorrow with patchy rain for some areas late in the morning or afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. RNZ National, it's 5:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thompson. Thank you everyone for joining us. Coming up, Malcolm Rewa will face trial for the Susan Burdett murder for the third time, and on Solds, I go to Christchurch and attend an EQC meeting with a buyer. But first, thousands of Aucklanders heading home tonight are facing major disruptions after the city's, only Central City train station and, of course, the region's train hub, Britomart, was shut down due to a derailment. 3 carriages of a train carrying 33 people came off the tracks this morning, putting a halt to all services running to and from the CBD, forcing people out onto the roads too, of course. And as Sarah Murphy reports, passengers are likely to face further disruptions tomorrow.
As the train made its way through the pitch-black tunnels of Auckland City's main transport hub this morning, passengers were just metres from their destination when 3 of its carriages came off the tracks. They were stranded on board the underground train for about an hour before they were eventually evacuated. Passenger Prashnil Kumar says no one really knew what was going on.
I heard something about evacuation, but I wasn't exactly sure what was happening. I did a lecture at like 10, so yeah, missed that.
The train's front 3 carriages are still off the rails this afternoon, while Transport Accident investigators survey the site. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission's Chief Investigator, Tim Burfitt, says the train won't be moved until they know what caused the derailment. He can't say how long the investigation will take.
It depends on the complexity of the site. But the idea is just to get the train back on the tracks and clear the area so that they can resume normal operations.
Services on all 4 Auckland train lines, the Eastern, Southern, Onehunga and Western lines, have been cancelled or delayed. Commuters using the Eastern Line train service will have to go to the nearest station, the Strand in Parnell, while people taking trains on the Western and Southern lines will have to go to Newmarket. There will be limited buses to transport them there, and trains will run every 20 minutes. People travelling between Onehunga and Penrose will have to take a shuttle bus, which will join the Southern Line service. James Ireland from Auckland Transport says around 15,000 people will be affected by the disruptions.
That's a lot of people to find alternative travel or to get where they need to go, if it's Strand or Newmarket, or they can get on a normally scheduled bus. So yes, it's a lot of people, and we do appreciate that it's an inconvenience, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that tonight's services run as smoothly as possible.
He says Auckland Transport is confident that all lines and trains operating tonight are safe.
There will be a complete safety audit across the rail lines, but the exact cause of this morning's derailment will come out with the investigation. We are confident that everything is completely safe.
Passengers are being warned that they should prepare for the possibility of further disruptions tomorrow. I tamaki makaurau mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Murphy, tēnei.
And Auckland Transport will join us live later in the program, but news of Britomart being out of action really only broke late this afternoon, and we suspect many people have gone down there thinking they will get their train home as per normal. To find it shut, let's go there live now where Tom Furley, our reporter, is there. Hi Tom, what's up?
Yeah, good evening, John. Yeah, well, it seems like a lot of people didn't know until they've turned up now. So there's still sort of a steady stream of people approaching the station. Then there's this big sort of sign in LEDs saying, no train services running. It's all coned off. So they're sort of having to think about other plans. There are quite a few staff here on high vis that are sort of directing people and trying to help them out, trying to find a way for them to get home. But, I've spoken to a couple of people who need to go and pick up their kids from daycare and all that sort of thing. So they're sort of busy trying to find people to pick them up or whatever. But there are buses that are leaving just around the corner, and so they're dropping people off at where trains are going from. So people heading out east are getting on at the Strand, which is just past Spark Arena there, so not too far away. So they can leave out east on the train from there, but others have to go all the way to Newmarket, which isn't exactly close. So there are these bus services shuttling them back and forth, but people are sort of getting on those buses and they're getting super full. I mean, people standing all the way down the line, so they're sort of being shuttled off there. But it seems like a few people didn't know until now, and I guess, I've been here for about half an hour, and there's been a steady trickle coming, but I guess the rush hour is only just starting, so no doubt there'll be a few more. There's normally about 15,000 odd who catch a train from the station each day, so I'll say there'll be a fair few people caught out.
Yeah, Tom, just before we go, do you know when the station's going to reopen?
No, well, I was talking to the communications guy just before I came down, actually, and he said at this stage they expect it will be closed tomorrow. So however people manage to get home this evening, they should plan ahead to do the same tomorrow. So, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see when they can get that train back on the tracks and when they finish their investigation.
Thanks, Tom. Tom Purley, who's live at Britomart. I'm just looking at the latest news in from NZTA, and they say traffic is basically heavy on the roads everywhere in Auckland. So it's going to be tough getting home tonight, I think. If you live in Christchurch, there will almost certainly be a new hyphenated word in your vocabulary, onsolds. If you don't live in Christchurch, it's homes with earthquake problems that EQC had missed that were onsold with the buyer not knowing about them. How's that possible? Well, now people are getting rigorous building reports before they buy, of course, but in the aftermath of the earthquakes, before all the issues about scoping failures and dodgy repairs were known, people took EQC at their work, and when they said all repair work completed, people believed them. Buyers believed them. Banks believed them. Conveyancing lawyers believed them. So what happens now when damage that had been missed is discovered? Well, ask Georgina Hannafin, who bought her first home with an EQC clean bill of health to find it was a disaster zone. Yesterday, after years of emails and building and engineering reports, she went to meet EQC to find out where she stands. And with our cameraman, Nick Monroe, I went to Christchurch to see what happened. Georgie, what are you showing me here?
This is the auction pack that we received prior to purchasing our house at auction.
And on it are 4 vital words: all EQC repairs complete. It's a classic auction pack, Harcourt's letterhead at the top, a photo of the house, a description of the property, but it's that one sentence that 4.5 years on echoes into meaninglessness.
All the EQC repair work had been completed. That was the selling point of the house.
In fact, that's in block letters. All EQC repairs completed, full stop.
Yep, and when we went to actually view the house, on the sign out the front of the house, they had that at the very top, and that was the byline of the property, was all EQC repairs completed.
And you believe that?
We had no reason not to. We had all of the documentation from the government that had signed off and said that it was all repaired.
And for people thinking a first home buyer should perhaps have done better due diligence, Georgina Hannafin wasn't alone in taking EQC at its word.
We emailed the auction pack to the bank, to the insurance company, and we gave it to our lawyers, and nobody saw any reason to believe otherwise.
And so Georgie Hannafin and her partner bought. And if you're wondering where we're at, we're in the EQC car park in Christchurch. And in a few minutes' time, another chapter in the sequel to that purchase will play out.
To put it simply, we have a house with a $300,000 mortgage on it. We've been told that we have $260,000 worth of damage, and EQC have just offered us $48,000 to fix it.
Let's leave the EQC car park for a moment and head across town to Linwood. The house itself is rather lovely, a bungalow with hints of that Californian vibe, a good-sized section, and the earthquake damage had been scoped and repaired, and the earthquake experts had signed off on that in writing. So they purchased. But what they didn't know was their house had been destabilised and aftershocks were still moving it, and the foundation repairs had been cosmetic rather than structural. You can see that in the cracks in the rim foundation around the exterior of the house. These have simply been filled in.
This is what they class as a skim repair, where they haven't actually done any repair other than take concrete, use a trowel to kind of rebox it and skim it, and as you can see, it's failing miserably. It's cracking. And
so that's the equivalent of putting on a thick layer of makeup, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it is.
We moved around the house. So there was a crack in this?
Yep, so that is where the crack was, and there's another one on this side of the house as well.
And this is considered a complete repair job?
This is considered a complete repair job.
Filled in, it's utterly cosmetic, and where the cracks had gone all the way through the foundation, they only filled in the bits you could see, the exterior.
They've essentially put a sticky tape, like a sticking plaster, on one side and haven't followed it through to the other side.
And that means sections of the house have moved independently from each other in aftershocks, sometimes away from each other. So when you bought your house, this extraordinary corner was painted and bogged and just looked ordinary.
100%.
If you're listening, we're at a perpendicular join where the side of the house meets the front of the house and the weatherboard connects at 90 degrees. Now, the walls are pulling apart. That's classic earthquake damage, and the repair strategy appears to have been to bog and paint the gap. And as we kneeled there, pulling out the bog put in post-earthquake under those EQC-approved repairs, exposing the widening gap between the walls, I was incredulous anyone could have missed this. I really want to clarify, as we're standing here looking at the separation here between the side of the house and the front of the house, that when you bought the house, you are absolutely certain that these two weatherboards would have been joined and painted and there would have been no sign whatsoever of this kind of damage.
There was 100% no sign of any damage that would have made us concerned for the integrity of the repairs. If this kind of damage had been visible at the time of the open home, we would have turned around and walked out.
Now they're stuck with it. They've received an as-is offer of $190,000, which is more than $100,000 less than their mortgage. And even if EQC wants to put it right, and they say they do, EQC can't spend more than $100,000 without hitting cap, which pushes it on to the private insurers, Vero. But Vero aren't having a bar of it, and Georgina Hannafin has that in writing. So they've actually used the word substandard.
They have used the word substandard.
Repair work to date is substandard.
They also say that Vero considers any repairs are remedial due to not being carried out correctly during the first time substantive repairs and or failed repair.
So what they're saying is they won't cover the insurance work because it's not earthquake damage, it's shoddy repair work by EQC.
Yeah, it's shoddy repair work, and then they go on to their recommendation. They've said that as EQC originally elected to repair the dwelling and commenced work, the responsibility to remediate it remains with EQC. Vero will not accept ownership of the remediation, even if the costs exceed the statutory cap. So that makes it quite clear.
Which brings us back to the EQC car park, pre-meeting, and a question before we go in. Georgie, what has been the toll of the past 4.5 years, buying your first home, believing all EQC repairs were completed because that is what you were told, to finding yourself in this position, mortgaged, negative equity, seemingly trapped with a property that has been a disaster?
I was pregnant when we closed on the property, so I now have a 4-year-old son who has never met the laid-back, happy, life-loving person that he should have. My relationship has ended, so it's been a catalyst in the end of my 15-year relationship. We went into this, we had big dreams for the house. It was close to family, it was close to friends, it was a good section, close to the mall. We thought we were buying our future.
4.5 years on, with an earthquake-damaged house worth considerably less money than she still owes on it, a huge repair job required, and an insurer who won't touch it, Georgina Hannafin is here to ask EQC, what's next? We walk in. Highly unusually, I've been invited to join them, to observe. I can't record, and I won't name the EQC staff who were there. But I can say the meeting passes in a circle of hurt, helplessness, repetitions, relitigations, concessions, strings, caveats, multiple glasses of water, and a sense of being trapped. And I sit and listen to a riddle that seems to have no answer. What does Georgie Hannafin do next? It's tough in there for all parties, and when we come out, everyone is slightly stunned. What's the time?
The time is 4 o'clock.
So we were in there for 2 hours.
We were.
And how was that?
It was a waste of time.
The problem is there's no room to move. EQC hits cap and can't pay more, full stop. The insurer says no way, full stop. And there's no apparent solution that will fully remediate the inadequacies of the initial scope and repair. And so, after all this time, over 4 years, a meeting has been agreed to. So, you bought this property in September 2013?
Yeah.
We are now in May 2018, and an EQC appointed builder is going to meet a builder sent along by you to discuss what next. That's as far as you've got after all this time.
After 5 years, that's as far as we've got. We've finally got somebody to come to the property, but it's actually not going to affect the outcome at all.
Georgina Hannafin, there are 664 homeowners in a similar kind of position who've bought homes since the earthquakes with EQC paperwork saying the repair work is completed and it was either done badly or damage was missed. One lawyer representing some of them says that number is the tip of a much larger iceberg. So if Georgina Hannafin is an example of the on-sold issue, what, I asked EQC CEO Sid Miller, should she do?
I think it is an incredibly difficult situation, John, as you rightly identify. We are, as an organisation, bound by the Act, and I believe the team yesterday went through with Georgie in terms of what, talking through the settlement, and we reach a point with the Act where we get to a cap, and that is, within the legislation is as far as we can go. And what we'll do is, work through with Georgie as we can. We're focused on trying to find a settlement for her, and that's very much that I know, on the forefront of the mind of my team and looking through all the different ways. And I think it's important. This is the sort of case management approach that we were putting in place to work with people like Georgie to, in terms of moving forward to help them understand, talk through the claim, and then look at what is it we can do to help them.
Right, what is it you can do? What is it you can do? Because if you hit cap, she goes to her private insurer. Her private insurer, Vero, and I have seen and read the letter, says EQC's repair work was substandard and it is not their job to remediate it, and the buck stops with EQC. So what does Georgie Hannafin do?
Well, I can't comment on the private insurer stance. That's their position. In terms of the EQC process, what we would do is, where situations like this get raised, we will look at what the problem is. Is it a repair that's failed? Is it new damage that's been found? And we will come in, we will look at that. If it's a repair that's failed, we will look to disregard costs around that repair, so we can take it back to sort of the original state, and then reapply the cap calculation based on that. If it's new scope, we would look at that, but we can only operate within the cap. So, for us, it's like every time somebody reopens this, we will step back in and look what it is that we can do and what the problem is within the constraints of the Act.
So what does Georgie Hannafin do now? I'm still confused as to how Georgie Hannafin finds a solution for this predicament.
Well, we will continue to work with Georgie within within the Act and up to that cap. I mean, I can't do anything more than that in terms of work within that cap. But as we did yesterday, working with Georgie and yourself there supporting her, we will continue to have those conversations, continue to listen to the challenges she's raising, and look at everything that we can do within the cap.
Is the cap problematic? Does something have to be done to make EQC more empowered in these situations to do what it looks like they ought to do, which is put what Vero calls substandard repairs right?
And this is the situation that the Minister is looking at. We as an organisation have to operate within the Act, and clearly this is something that is at the is beyond just the Act is where it is today, and the Minister is has set in place a whole load of work to look at what options may be available. But in terms of where somebody's at cap, then that is a situation with them and their private insurers.
But the private insurers are saying, no, back at you, EQC. I mean, I've seen the letter. So Vero say, this is EQC's fault. It is EQC's problem. EQC have to remediate it. You say, we'd love to, but we can't go beyond cap. And it just seems to me a kind of absurd rock and hard place scenario for the homeowner here. What does Georgina Hannafin do once she hits cap?
It is a very, very difficult position that people are in. I absolutely understand that. But I cannot go outside of the Act. And this is the reason that this work is going on, to try and understand what and look at any solutions as to how do we deal with this. I still say it's people to have a conversation with their private insurers. They have that relationship with them, but we as EQC can only work within the EQC Act.
So is the Act flawed? Do you want to say now on Checkpoint that the Act is flawed in this respect?
John, that is not place for me to say.
Why not?
The legislation is the domain of the legislation is the domain of the minister. The minister is seeking advice from us in terms of and all departments around what is it that she can. What is it can be looked at here and what solutions may exist, and we need to support that work, which we are doing through engineering, through actuarial, everything that we can to support this work to try and get look at and dealing with the situation that people are in, which is very difficult, and we understand that, but we work within the Act.
Are you hamstrung by the Act? Do you wish you had more power to put things right? When I was a kid, there was I don't know if you were in New Zealand at this time, but there was an appliance store in Wellington called LV Martin, and it used to have a TV ad that said, "It's the putting right that counts." Now, it strikes me that EQC might really want to put it right. Certainly the two EQC representatives in that meeting room yesterday with Georgie Hannafin told her they did, but they keep hitting cap. You've mentioned cap, 10 times in this interview? Would you like more discretion, more ability to put it right?
Look, John, we, as a Crown entity, we work within the Act, and that is, that are the parameters that we operate to. In terms of the problem that we're facing here, we are working, with the minister across other agencies to look at what options are available to deal with this problem. And we, as I've talked already, we've got our engineering resources, our technical people, our actuaries we've got. So I'm trying to put everything I can in terms of working with the minister and Treasury and the other agencies to try and find a way through this. So we're very focused on that. Until that changes, or till anything comes out of that alters the direction, then we have to work within the Act, I'm afraid. There's no other choice for us. That is the law.
Sid Miller, now we really want to hear from you if you are an onsalt, particularly one who, as well as the EQC tick of approval, also got a building report. We want to talk to people who said these houses were fine when they weren't. Please get in touch with us. Text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Coming up on the program, serial rapist Malcolm Rewa faces a third trial for the murder of Susan Burdett. US President Donald Trump quits the Iran nuclear deal. Family Violence Services get a $76 million funding boost, and foreign aid gets a $700 million funding boost. Where will it go? We'd love your feedback. We've told you the text number 2101. Do get in touch. And if you are an onsalt, please do. It's 27 minutes to 6, so we are late even by our standards, Anna Thomas. But here you are with the headlines. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Malcolm Rewa will face a third murder trial over the 1992 killing of Susan Burdett. Rewa was sentenced to 22 years in prison for the rape of more than 20 women, but two juries could not decide whether he was also guilty of murdering Ms Burdett. A stay of proceedings was issued 20 years ago, but Taina Pora was acquitted for the murder in 2015. The Attorney General restarted proceedings for a third time. Rewa's lawyer challenged that decision, but the Chief High Court judge ruled in favour of a third trial today. Commuters arriving at Auckland's Britomart train station are being caught out by its closure after 3 train carriages derailed this morning. The disruption is delaying the journey home for many tonight, with the only trains running leaving from the Strand or Newmarket. Auckland Transport says about 15,000 commuters use the trains at rush hour, so other public transport will be busy tonight. Officials are at the station to advise people on their travel options. The Earthquake Commission says it can't help homeowners with missed or badly repaired quake damage if it will cost more than $100,000 to fix. A woman who bought a house in 2013 with EQC paperwork is stating all repairs were finished, has now found some damage was missed and some repairs substandard. Georgina Hannafin now has a $300,000 mortgage on a quake-damaged home worth considerably less than that. She says EQC made the mistake and should repair it, but the Commission says it can't if the cost is greater than $100,000. The Prime Minister is downplaying differences between her ministers over making te reo Māori compulsory in schools. The government's policy is that te reo be available in all primary schools by 2025, but the Māori Development Minister, Nanaia Mahuta, says it will eventually be compulsory. The New Zealand First Leader, Winston Peters, says Ms Mahuta should ensure her view is not portrayed as current policy. And that's the news.
Thanks very much, Anna. Lots of people asking, like Ian in this email, where's the blowtorch on the original builder who undertook the repairs? And of course the person who did the scope. Really good question. And when Georgie Hannafin got her material under the Official Information Act and the Privacy Act from EQC, the names of the people who did that work and did those assessments had been redacted. So she has no idea who's done it and she can't find out. Extraordinary state of affairs. But we will look at that. If you get in touch with us, if you've had a building report done as well as EQC repairs, then we will talk to people. Let's turn to business news now with Emile Donovan. Hi, Emile. The Super Fund. Goodness gracious me.
Yeah, the Super Fund. Basically, it's come out today that the Super Fund has approached the government with an offer to invest in and build the proposed light rail system up in your neck of the woods, John. Now, any such deal would be a partnership, as of course the Super Fund is not in the business of building and maintaining rail networks, but it has put forward a partner. It's a Canadian fund manager, CDPQ Infra, which actually helped to build and develop and still operates the light rail network in Montreal in Canada. Now, the big question here really, I guess, is why the Super Fund would be investing in light rail in Auckland. And look, the short answer is it's a big and important enough project to attract its attention. The fund has $38 billion at its disposal. The bulk of that is invested in assets overseas, shares mainly, but it does also have about $5 billion invested locally in, among other things, Kiwi Bank and housing developments and things like that. And it is looking for other local projects to invest in. So clearly this looks like an attractive enough proposition for it to get involved with. So it'll be super interesting to see where this goes.
Yeah, super interesting. It's absolutely fascinating. Thanks, Emile. This is one that is going to make the rest of the country shake their heads with the fact that we are even mentioning it. But in Auckland, obviously, this is an issue. Auckland has cracked into a particularly undesirable top 10 list in terms of costs in this outrageously overpriced city.
That's right. That's right, John. This might not come as a surprise to many Aucklanders. It might not come as a surprise to you, even.
Don't make any judgments. Don't you make any value judgments about me, Emile Donovan.
You wear a suit every day, John, and I imagine you dry clean it. And you, living north of the Bombay Hills, pay, wait for it, the 8th highest price in the world for dry cleaning. This comes from the fabulously named 2018 Dry Cleaning Index. It measures the cost of dry cleaning a suit in cities around the world. Aucklanders pay on average $35 for a clean. That's compared to a global average of just a touch under $20. That puts you above New York, Paris and London, and sandwiches you between the fashion powerhouses of Vienna and Graz, which are both in Austria. Interestingly though, the top 5 cities are those places that we idealise as sort of Scandinavian utopias. We're talking Oslo, Helsinki, Gothenburg in Sweden, Aarhus in Denmark, and Zurich, which isn't in Scandinavia, but hey, you know, there you go. In fact, in Oslo, this is astonishing, you're going to be forking out $75 for a suit to get dry cleaned, which is just outrageous.
Yeah, it is.
But look, I mean, that's Norway. In the course of my research into the cost of living in Norway, I found out that a pint of beer, the average pint of beer at a bar costs $14, and a cappuccino is going to set you back $6.80. So I'm feeling pretty good about living in Wellington.
Yeah, go Welly, Emile. What did the markets do today?
The NZX50 is up 25 points, that's 0.29%. It closed on 8619. And the dollar is buying 69.5 US cents, 93.5 Australian, and 51.4 pence.
Thanks, Emil Donovan. It's coming up to 20 to 6. This is another big story out this afternoon. The serial rapist Malcolm Rewa will face a third trial for the murder of Susan Burdett. Rewa is serving a 22-year prison sentence for the rape of more than 20 women. But despite his DNA being found at the scene of the crime and his conviction for her rape, 2 juries failed to reach verdicts on whether Rewa murdered Ms Burdett. The Attorney-General issued a stay 20 years ago, meaning no further prosecution of Rewa would go ahead. But following Tēnā Pora's convictions being quashed by the Privy Council, the Attorney-General effectively lifted the stay. Rewa's lawyer challenged that decision in the High Court. Our court reporter, our excellent court reporter here in Auckland, Edward Gay, has been looking into the case and is beside me in the studios. So what's the High Court said, Eddie?
Well, Rewa's lawyer challenged the Attorney-General's right to lift a stay in the first place, and he said the Attorney-General should actually be applying through the court. But Justice Venning today, the Chief High Court judge, he ruled that there was no procedural bar to lifting a stay for the Attorney-General. The judge said that the Attorney-General was exercising a prerogative power and there was no reason for an application to the court. He found that while the decision to lift a stay could be reviewed by the court, he declined to review this particular decision.
Right, thank you, Eddie. Now, we should say that this is now sub judice and the fair trial rules apply, but there's also an insight into why the Attorney-General wants to try Rewa for a third time, right?
That's right, and this stay was lifted after Tēnā Pora's convictions for the murder were quashed, and Mr Pora was wrongfully convicted based on a false confession, and those convictions were quashed by the Privy Council back in 2015. And the Attorney-General's reasons for mounting a third trial are actually set out in Justice Venning's decision. I guess it's a rare insight into that document's actually set out in full.
That's available online, is it? Or you can.
Yes, it is actually.
Yeah.
It is available on
It'd be
the
a fascinating read. Yeah.
Essentially, the Attorney-General said that after Mr Pora's convictions were quashed, no one has been held accountable for the murder, and there was sufficient evidence to support the murder charge against Rewa. The Attorney-General also said there was public interest in an offender being held accountable for the murder, and Justice Venning said there was no evidence before the court that amounted to bad faith on the part of the Attorney-General. He said although third trials are rare, and they're extremely rare, they have happened in the past in New Zealand.
Right, so what happens now?
Well, the case comes back to the High Court next month, where Rewa's lawyer is expected to notify the court on whether there are any pre-trial applications. That, of course, could include an application to dismiss the prosecution, but otherwise a trial has been set down for 8 weeks beginning in February next year.
Gosh. Edward Gay, thank you very much indeed, Eddie. All of that coming out this afternoon. It's coming up to 17 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ. President Donald Trump has confirmed he's quitting the Iran nuclear deal, pitting him against the United States' closest allies, leaving the future of Tehran's nuclear ambitions in question. In fact, leaving many things in question in Iran. Mr. Trump said he will reimpose new sanctions on the Iranian regime, scrapping the breakthrough agreement negotiated by his predecessor Barack Obama. President Trump says any country that helps Iran obtain nuclear weapons would also be strongly sanctioned. The Iranian president has said Donald Trump's withdrawal of the US from the nuclear deal is a form of psychological warfare. He says he's ordering officials to be ready to start the enrichment of uranium, but added that he'd hoped to hold consultations with other parties to the agreement first. Obviously, European states key. The UK, France and Germany called Mr. Trump's decision a matter of regret and concern. Russia says it's deeply disappointed by the move, which it described as a violation of international law. Turkey says the decision will cause new instability and conflict in the Middle East. We're going to Turkey later in the program. The US's biggest allies in the region, Israel and Saudi Arabia, are almost alone in their support for Donald Trump's decision. Here's the BBC's Nick Bryant.
With a flourish of his presidential pen, Donald Trump has inked into history one of the most muscular pledges from his America First campaign, one that delivers a potentially fatal blow to the signature foreign policy achievement of his predecessor Barack Obama, one that could put the United States on a collision course with Iran.
The fact is, this was a horrible, one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made. It didn't bring calm, it didn't bring peace, and it never will. Therefore, I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
In one of his toughest speeches yet, he said he'd reimpose the highest level of economic sanctions against Tehran.
America will not be held hostage to nuclear blackmail. We will not allow American cities to be threatened with destruction, and we will not allow a regime that chants death to America to gain access to the most deadly weapons on earth. Today's action sends a critical message. The United States no longer makes empty threats. When I make promises, I keep them.
The nuclear deal was struck in 2015 between Iran and 6 world powers, including the US, UK and Russia. Iran agreed to limit its controversial nuclear energy program, which international powers feared could lead to the development of a nuclear weapon. In return, stringent economic sanctions were lifted, enabling Iran to sell more oil to other countries and trade more efficiently. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani delivered an almost instantaneous response, saying his country was preparing to restart uranium enrichment, key for making both nuclear energy and weapons.
I have ordered the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran to be ready to start the enrichment of uranium at industrial levels. We will wait a few weeks and speak with our allies. All depends on our national interests.
European architects of the deal, present at its creation 3 years ago, tonight gave a very grim-faced response.
The European Union is determined to act in accordance with its security interests and to protect its economic investments. The nuclear deal with Iran is the culmination of 12 years of diplomacy. It belongs to the entire international community. It has been working and it is delivering on its goal, which is guaranteeing that Iran doesn't develop nuclear weapons.
But praise from America's closest Middle East ally.
Israel thanks President Trump for his courageous leadership, his commitment to confront the terrorist regime in Tehran, and his commitment to ensure that Iran never gets nuclear weapons. Not today, not in a decade, not ever.
From Barack Obama tonight, a rare public rebuke of his successor. He called Mr. Trump's decision misguided and a serious mistake.
This will make America much safer. Thank you very much.
But Donald Trump is unapologetic. For him, it's promise made, promise kept.
Nick Bryant reporting from Washington. Later in the program we'll be in Turkey. The Women's Refuge says it's a huge relief to get a funding boost as its staff and services have been stretched to the limit over the past decade. The government is to allocate an extra $76 million to about 150 providers of family violence services around the country over the next 4 years. Our deputy political editor Chris Bramwell was at the pre-budget announcement in Wellington.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern told a Salvation Army breakfast this morning that a major challenge gets in the way of New Zealand being a great place for a child to grow up.
His government knows that in order for New Zealand to be the best place to be a child, their homes and their families need to live free from violence. Children need to feel safe.
Ms Ardern says funding critical frontline services is just part of what the government needs to be doing.
Of course our hope is to reduce and prevent family violence from occurring in the first place, but there is no doubt with the increase we've seen in reporting and incidents that we need to make sure that frontline services like Women's Refuge are funded to do their job, and in the last 10 years they haven't been.
The National Party leader Simon Bridges says the funding looks as though it's not targeted enough.
Last year we had a package, for well over $100 million that we thought was targeted, that was following our social investment approach, and you're not seeing that in this. In fact, it's pretty vague on the detail.
The Chief Executive of Women's Refuge, Ange Jury, says the extra funding is great, but there's never enough money as the problem of domestic violence never seems to go away.
In terms of where we've been for the last decade or more, it's an extremely welcome relief to the women that are out there doing that work.
New Zealand's family violence statistics are staggering. In 2016, the police attended a domestic violence incident every 5 minutes, and Ange Jury says that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Police themselves estimate that they only see at maximum 20-25% of what's actually occurring. So do the math. 12,000 incidents times 5 for a little country like New Zealand. So that's not pretty, and it's not reducing.
Major Pam Waugh from the Salvation Army says family violence is one of the biggest contributors to poverty. She estimates about 70% of its clients have experienced violence in the home in some way.
Either they're in the midst of it or they've grown up in it, and the impact that it has had on them long term still affects them. We see children that are very stressed by it, we see children that become very marginalised, and we see families living in complete poverty where the financial stress of it becomes a huge problem for them.
Pam Waugh says the extra money is a good start, and the Salvation Army will now be able to boost some programs that it had to pull back on over the past decade. Atu I te whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
10 to 6. Work is underway to head off a near-certain failure of the school payroll system, Novopay. It comes as a business case obtained under the Official Information Act reveals the Crown-owned company that runs Novopay warned the government 18 months ago that technical support for its online system would cease in December 2019. The payroll system has been plagued with problems, of course, including a $40 million fix-it job since it was introduced in 2012. Our education correspondent, John Gerritsen, has the details.
The business case obtained under the Official Information Act by the IT news service Reseller News says Novopay had an unacceptably high level of operating risk in 2016. It revealed the payroll system's online functions rely on a feature that IT company Oracle will stop supporting at the end of next year. Duncan Bonick from Education Payroll, the company which runs Novopay, says the feature will be replaced.
Novopay Online is the online portal software that's currently used by schools to access the payroll system. And yes, it's still using that Oracle system. But as part of a normal life cycle management, we're replacing this. We're confident that this work will be completed well in advance of the system becoming unsupportable, so absolutely no later than December 2019.
The business case also called for Novopay to become fully online, eliminating thousands of manual re-entries that often result in error. Duncan Bonick says that work is underway and changes will be made incrementally to avoid the sorts of problems that dogged Novopay when it was launched in 2012. But after the issues that have plagued the system, the National Secretary of the Educational Institute, Paul Galter, is sceptical.
I don't think there'd be any confidence amongst the sector that the payroll people can fix this. It's not really been demonstrated in the past. There's still a major legacy of issues around leave, super payments, whatever, that still haven't been fixed from the last debacle. Stephen Joyce promised he'd get this fixed, and now we find that, no, there's a hell of a lot of other problems, and we're on a promise to get them fixed.
Fetu Cormack from the Principals Federation is on a payroll reference group. He says the potential for failure of the system in 2020 is news to him.
I'm not aware of the report findings in that regard. I'm sure that Education Payroll Services, if this is true, will be taking it seriously, and I'll be looking forward to having conversations with them about it.
Fetu Cormack says plans to move Novopay to an entirely online model make him nervous.
Previously, when we had the big muck-up in 2012, we were given an assurance back then that it was going to work, and so one of the concerns I have is, and I've raised this with Education Payroll, how assured can we be that the new system is going to work? So we're just sitting waiting, frankly, to see how it's going to roll out.
Fetu Cormack says there's still a lot of mistrust of Novopay, but schools' satisfaction with the system is pretty good. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
International development agencies are hailing the government's $714 million boost in foreign aid to the Pacific as a shift from dependence to partnership. But the political reaction is not so warm, with National saying it's money that would be better spent at home. In a pre-budget speech last night, the Foreign Minister Winston Peters said the majority would go to projects and security in the Pacific. But there wasn't a lot of detail about what specifically it would be spent on. Here's our political reporter, Teresa Cowie.
About a week out from Budget Day, Winston Peters revealed the major funding boost for the ministry which runs New Zealand's foreign affairs and trade policy. Helping New Zealand's Pacific neighbours respond to climate change and natural disasters will claim the majority of the spend. But security is also part of the equation, with New Zealand wanting to hold its ground as China and other countries boost their presence in the region. When announcing the new money, Mr Peters said New Zealand and the Pacific needed to work together.
Our identity is anchored in the Pacific, and it's fitting and proper that we foster our fraternal bonds with our Pacific neighbours. What's good for them is good for us.
Nationals leader Simon Bridges says the extra money is obviously payback to Winston Peters for choosing to form a government with Labour. And he says the cash injection to MFAT clearly shows the government has its priorities wrong.
It's prioritising diplomats over doctors. They made a promise around doctors from 1 July, cheaper visits, and they're breaking it, and that's not good enough.
This was the reaction on the streets of Wellington.
I think it is excellent because I think that the Pacific's been underfunded, and the whole soft power in China and political influence, I think that we need to keep our toes in the water there.
I agree that, some money should be spent, especially on our neighbours in the Pacific, but definitely greater needs at home, homelessness, health. There's a lot of different areas that some money could be put towards as well.
However, the Cook Islands' Finance Minister Mark Brown says it's very encouraging New Zealand's investing so much in its partnership with the Pacific.
Well, I think I was very surprised at the extent of the investment that New Zealand is looking to put into the Pacific, with the development assistance program being boosted to the tune of, I think, an extra third of what the current budget is.
The director of the Council for International Development, Josie Pagani, says the funding boost represents a positive shift in the relationship. But she says the money should also come with expectations.
This is about partnership, and it's about being family. So when you're family, you've got the right also to have some pretty uncomfortable conversations. So it's okay to say we expect standards in the Pacific to be good. We expect civil society groups and community groups to have their voice heard.
The Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, says the $714 million spend is easy to justify on the grounds of national security.
Because New Zealand's very economic and security issues for the future are going to be governed by this. We don't make these sorts of investments, our country will be so much worse off.
While Mr Peters wouldn't specifically name China, there has been a lot of discussion about New Zealand remaining a player in the region or allowing other influences to fill the void. Alongside that, New Zealand has a close economic relationship with China, including a free trade deal that's currently under review. And Mr Peters says he'll be going on an official visit to China very soon. So, what's on the agenda?
Serious business to do with this country's economic future and our relationships with China with respect to things like the upgrade, matters like that.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says she also intends to go to China before the end of the year. At Parliament for Checkpoint, ko Teresa Cowie Tēnei.
3 minutes to 6. Stephen Mann, who's a good fellow at the Christchurch Transport Operations Centre, has just contacted us to say a crash has closed the old Waimakariri Bridge to Kaiapoi. Police are currently diverting traffic from Main North Road onto the Northern Motorway. So if you're wondering what's going on there, the old Waimakariri Bridge is close. So much feedback coming in on EQC, as is always the case. In fact, more is just coming to the studio now. Let's read some out. Hi, John. Can't we give the $700 million foreign aid budget to EQC? Problem solved. Just common sense. Let's sort ourselves out before we try to sort anyone else out, says Gordon. Christchurch Onsolds. I wonder why the Serious Fraud Office isn't investigating. The EQC spent massive amounts of money on work that was never done and signed legal documents guaranteeing the work was completed, says AJ. Asked Jerry Brownlee what to do in the Hannafin case. It happened on his watch, says Selwyn. Hi, John. We're yet another onsold with a cosmetic repair. It seems to be the case with quite a few of the onsolds that we've looked at. We have filed in the District Court. EQC sent an engineer who has written a report that states we need a full set of new piles. And most of the issues also, as an aside, do seem to be under the floors. However, back to this correspondence text, we are making no progress on a settlement as EQC say they require the previous owner's insurance policy, which we are unable to supply. Lots of people saying this is fraud or negligence on a massive scale. It should be dealt with by the Serious Fraud Office, that kind of stuff. Ali says, great start with Georgie's story, but it's only the start. Lots more investigating and reporting ahead. Hang in there. We need it. Now that onsolds are an issue, if you own an EQC repaired house and want to sell it, people won't touch it. That traps a lot more innocent people into corners. And when they want to move on but can't sell, whether or not the repairs are adequate, if there have been any adequate repairs, well, they're stuck there, Ali says. And it really skews the real estate market, though the real estate agents won't talk about it. This from Rochelle. Georgie could sue under the Fair Trading Act for misleading and deceptive conduct regarding the state of the repairs and the damage loss suffered equals at least difference between actual cost and EQC cap, and much more. People saying, why don't we go after the builders? We don't know who they are because all that information is redacted. Lots of people saying that Georgia should go to court. Georgia can't afford to go to court. It's that simple. You can take a class action and your lawyers will work for free in return for getting a share of the payout if there is one, but if there isn't one, that is entirely problematic. It is very, very expensive to go to court, but there are hundreds of people doing so, and some of those will eventually be test cases, and they may indeed shape law. It's 6 o'clock in 5 pips.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Hundreds of people are showing up to Auckland's Britomart train station unaware it's closed. Services on all 4 rail lines have been cancelled or delayed after 3 carriages derailed at Britomart this morning. With limited replacement buses running to and from the nearest stations, commuters are being asked to make alternative arrangements. Amanda Fuller says she saw the news about the derailing during her lunch break but thought it would be cleared by the time she finished at 4. She showed up to Britomart to find it still closed.
And I've got my kid in daycare at Discovery's in Panmure train station, and so I've had to ring them and say, look, I'm sorry there's been a derailing of a train. I'm going to be late with picking him up. So, and then in the end they sort of directed me to get a bus, and then you have to go to Newmarket, I think, and get on another bus or get onto a train. I thought, I'm just going to use our taxi driver that we normally use for work.
Auckland commuter Amanda Fuller, and problems are expected to continue at Britomart tomorrow morning. Serial rapist Malcolm Rewa will face a 3rd murder trial over the 1992 killing of Susan Burdett. Rewa was eventually sentenced to 22 years in prison for the rape of more than 20 women, but 2 juries could not decide whether he was guilty of murdering Ms Burdett, and a stay of proceedings was issued 20 years ago. Following Teina Pora's full acquittal for the murder in 2015, the Attorney General decided to recommence proceedings against Rewa for a 3rd time. Rewa's lawyer challenged that decision. In a ruling released today, the Chief High Court Judge, Justice Venning, said it was up to the Attorney General to grant and lift stays, and while the court could review the decision, it had declined to do so in the Rewa case. Rewa is due to stand trial in February next year. The US Treasury has been releasing details about the economic sanctions it will be reimposing on Iran. The Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin says the US will punish businesses that fail to meet deadlines that have been set to end trade links with Tehran. Aircraft manufacturers Airbus and Boeing have been advised they will have their export licences to Iran revoked. Both corporations have multi-billion-dollar sales deals signed with the Iranian government. The school payroll system Novopay faces an overhaul to avoid an otherwise likely failure after the end of next year. A business case from 2016 shows one aspect of the online system will no longer be supported after December 29, making failure almost certain. Duncan Bonick from Education Payroll says Novopay still uses that feature, but it is being replaced.
Novopay Online is the online portal software that's currently used by schools to access the payroll system. And yes, it's still using that Oracle system. But as part of a normal life cycle management, we're replacing this. We're confident that this work will be completed well in advance of the system becoming unsupportable, so absolutely no later than December 2019.
Duncan Bonick says Novopay will become a fully online system, eliminating the need for manual entries. The Chief Executive of Women's Refuge, Ange Jury, says this morning's announcement of a boost in funding for family violence services will be well received. The government will give an extra $76 million over 4 years to about 150 providers, including Women's Refuge. Ms Jury says the extra funding is great, but no amount of money is ever enough, as domestic violence never seems to go away.
In terms of where we've been for the last decade or more, it's an extremely welcome relief to the women that are out there doing that work.
Ange Jury of Women's Refuge. The future of Roxburgh Children's Village is looking grim after the government told 2 Otago mayors there is no further funding available in the upcoming budget. Stand Children's Services, which runs the facility along with one in Otaki, needs $3 million to remain open. The Mayor's brothers, Brian and Tim Cadogan, met today with the Prime Minister and the Minister of Children. Brian Cadogan says the government won't change its position, a decision he describes as gutting. He says he has some sympathy for the government's financial position, but his greatest concern is the children who need the facility. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern insists all her ministers are on the same page over whether te reo Māori should be compulsory in schools. The government's policy is that te reo be available in all primary schools by 2025. But the Māori Development Minister, Nanaia Mahuta, says eventually it will be compulsory. Here's our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
Ms Ardern says Ms Mahuta is looking to the future, but the government's policy remains the same. She says there aren't enough te reo teachers in the country right now for compulsory lessons to be possible. The New Zealand First Leader, Winston Peters, has chastised Ms Mahuta, saying while he understands her enthusiasm, she has to make sure her views not portrayed as policy. Ms Ardern says she's comfortable with those comments, saying all her ministers are used to robust exchanges. From Parliament, Craig McCulloch.
It's 6:05. The Wallabies rugby great Mark Alla wants the All Blacks to save Australian rugby. Alla has called for an open door policy, allowing players more freedom of movement between countries. New Zealand teams have won 38 consecutive games against Australian sides, and Alla says that dominance is damaging the credibility of the competition. He believes the competition's governing body, SANZAR, needs to work with the national bodies to redistribute playing talent around the Super Rugby teams in Australia, Argentina, New Zealand, South Africa and Japan to stem what he says is New Zealand's unhealthy dominance. He believes if players were free to play for any team, it would even up the competition. Currently, New Zealand Rugby will only select players for the All Blacks if they're playing Super Rugby teams. Old rivals Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson have thrown down the gauntlet to each other ahead of golf's unofficial 5th major, the Players' Championship, which starts in Florida on Thursday night. Woods and Mickelson have been grouped together for the first 2 rounds. For almost 20 years, the pair endured a frosty relationship on the US Tour, and Mickelson has reignited the rivalry ahead of the latest tournament when he challenged 14-time major winner Woods to a bet.
Why don't we just bypass all the ancillary stuff of a tournament and just go head-to-head and just have a kind of a high-stakes winner-take-all match? Now, I don't know if he wants a piece of me, but I think it'd be something that would be really fun for us to do, and I think there'd be a lot of interest in it if we just went straight to the final round.
Phil Mickelson. And after 8 years in the top flight, West Bromwich Albion have been relegated from English football's Premier League. And that's the news.
More money for the Pacific.
It's good to hear that there's a shift in the other direction now and that New Zealand will be more engaged with the Pacific region.
But is it better spent at home?
900 million into that when you've got these other promises you're breaking that are core ones that New Zealanders feel strongly about.
Fruit pickers might have to wait.
Abatement rates have not been lifted for a long period of time. It'll be addressed and it's something that we're committed to doing.
When?
It'll be addressed and it's something we're committed to doing within the next 3 years.
Stay tuned. Morning Reports with Susie Ferguson and Guy Aspinall, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, a new report suggests sustainability in business could reap billions of dollars for Auckland. And after 10, the bizarre and fascinating theft of priceless bird specimens from the British Natural History Museum by a young man obsessed with the Victorian art of salmon fly tying. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island, mainly fine. Some cloudy areas tomorrow with the odd shower north of Taupō and also about Kapiti and Wellington. Nelson and Buller, fine with cloud increasing tomorrow and a few showers developing. Westland and Fiordland, mostly fine but occasional rain tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, high cloud tomorrow with patchy rain for some areas late morning or afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. RNZ National. It's 9 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
And Anna Thomas on the news. Thank you very much indeed, Anna. Auckland rail commuters are facing major disruptions tonight, which I think have put a lot more cars on the road looking at the traffic situation in the city. The trains, the city's train hub, and of course the only station in the central city shut down after a derailment. The first 3 carriages of a train carrying 33 people came off the tracks this morning, putting a halt to all services running to and from that central city station, Britomart. That's caused disruptions for thousands of commuters tonight, and there are long queues for buses that are being put on. We're joined now by James Island from Auckland Transport. James, how are you?
Good evening, John. It's been a busy day, but we're getting through and we're keeping Auckland moving.
Right. People didn't know Britomart was shut, did they? It was enough done to tell people not to head down there.
Yes, we think we've done everything we can to communicate to our customers. So we put out information on our social media to yourselves and the media. We sent out emails to all of our registered Hop Card customers as well.
Okay. What caused the derailment? What happened this morning, the derailment?
So this morning at about 9:40 a.m, a train coming into Britomart suffered a partial derailment. And it came to rest in the tunnel of Britomart, which meant that we had to halt all train services in and out.
How did that happen, James?
Look, it's too early for us to say. So right now, the Transport Accident Investigation Commission are looking at the train. So until they do their investigation, we really don't know exactly what happened.
And the train is still there?
The train is still there, so they are inspecting it right now. And once that's complete, they are going to start the process of moving it out of the tunnel.
Was anyone hurt?
No, everyone was perfectly fine. The train was going very slowly when it came off the tracks, so we're very happy that no one was hurt.
So I just look, James, this isn't you. Obviously the procedure must be followed. I'm not holding you responsible for it, but I just can't imagine a situation in London, for example, or Paris or anywhere else that trains are central to the life of a city, where 9 hours later the damn thing would still be on the track when no one was hurt.
Well, John, as I say, there's a process that has to happen, and that really is done by the Transport Accident Investigation Commission. It's really them and KiwiRail who have to give us the go-ahead before we can reopen Britomart.
Right, and so when do you think, and I absolutely accept that, when do you think that you will be given the go-ahead? The clipboards will be put away, the work will be done, and you will be given the go-ahead to reopen the only station in central Auckland?
So right now, obviously it's closed right now, and we are expecting that it will probably be closed tomorrow morning as well. So right now, we really hope it will be open, late morning, midday tomorrow.
And what's the traffic like on the roads tonight?
It's Auckland. It's Auckland at 6 p.m. It's busy, and today the buses in particular are busier than usual because we have put on replacement buses, which will get our customers from Britomart to the Strand to catch the Eastern Line services, and from Britomart to Newmarket, where they can catch the Western and Southern Line services. So those buses are busy, as well as the normally scheduled buses that people are taking. Those are extra busy tonight.
Right, so James, can I just clarify, whilst Britomart will be shut tomorrow morning until whenever you're given permission to open it again, people can still catch the trains to the Strand if they're coming from the east, or to Newmarket if they're coming from elsewhere?
Correct, yes. So Southern and Western lines to Newmarket, Western lines to the Strand, and the Onehunga line will run as a rail shuttle between Onehunga and Penrose, where customers can transfer to a Southern Line train. And
there will be buses on, so if your train ride ends at Newmarket, there will be buses to get you into town?
There will be buses, and they will take you to the corner of Quay Street and Commerce Street, right by Britomart Station.
James Island from Auckland Transport, who is joining us live. Thanks very much indeed. Heavy traffic on Auckland's roads, but I don't think disastrously heavy in the circumstances. The buses seem to be doing their trick, although people are queuing up for a wee while to get onto one. Donald Trump has pulled the United States out of an international nuclear deal with Iran, raising the risk of conflict in the Middle East and upsetting European allies. In a long telegraphed address from the White House, the US President said he would reimpose economic sanctions on Iran to undermine what he described as a horrible one-sided deal. That was Barack Obama's work. Of course, the leaders of Britain, Germany and France, which were signatories to that Obama deal, along with China and Russia, said in a joint statement that Mr. Trump's decision is a cause for regret and concern. The Turkish president is one of those who fears that a new crisis will break out in the Middle East as a result of the US decision. Now, I spoke to CNN's correspondent in Istanbul a short time ago, Jomana Kurace, about well, what's going on up there?
We heard, John, yesterday from the Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, speaking to one of my colleagues in a sit-down interview in the capital, Ankara. And they were, he's really concerned about where this is all going. First of all, saying that this doesn't bode well for the United States, that it seems that the U.S. does not commit to international agreements, but he's also concerned about the impact, the implications this could have on stability in this region. Of course, concerned that this could further destabilize this already turbulent and very unstable region, saying that this could create new crises. He's, of course, concerned about the economic impact of President Trump's decision. Of course, Turkey and Iran, they've had their issues in the past. There is this relationship of a rivalry, yet there's also cooperation. We've seen them getting closer in recent months, especially on issues like trying to bring the Syrian conflict to an end. And they are major trade partners. So there is, of course, that concern. But the words coming from the Turkish president really warning about the implications of this decision by President Trump.
Is there a take there on the implications of this decision for the Iranian people? Because the more I read, the more they look like potentially the biggest losers. They are absolutely stuck between a rock and a hard place, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the concern. There was a lot of hope based on this agreement. There was hope that it will ease, their economic concerns, that it will bring about more openness to the entire world, that it would revive Iran's economy that is already struggling. And we have seen in recent days the impact this is having, with their currency yet again dropping to the lowest level compared to the U.S. dollar. And, the feeling we hear from correspondents in Iran, we've heard this yesterday also, straight after the announcement from President Trump, we heard it from Iranian President Rouhani saying that the aim of the United States here is to put pressure on the Iranian people. So far, it's been, a message of defiance that we are hearing. But of course, this is going to be very, very tough on the Iranian population.
Can we go back to where you are, Jomana, and that is Turkey? What will Turkey do? Because not only is President Trump talking about sanctions on Iran, of course, and that's the whole point of this, but he's also talking about sanctions on people who trade with Iran. Now, clearly, Turkey trades with Iran and will continue to do so. European states trade with Iran and will continue to deal with Iran. But how does Turkey appease its neighbour Iran and the US at the same time?
That is the big question, John. I think we're going to have to wait and see. It's not just Turkey, of course. You've got so many European countries that are concerned about secondary sanctions and how this is going to impact, their business dealings with Iran. Everyone is waiting to see how that is going to work out, how they can try and preserve those business ties. When it comes to Turkey, as you know, tensions between the United States and Turkey have been building for several months now on, several different fronts, especially when it comes to the United States support of Kurdish militias in northern Syria, right on Turkey's doorstep. And they have seen this as a threat to the country's national security. So it's obviously a very complex situation in this region, complex dynamics. So we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. But, Turkey has been getting closer to countries like Iran and Russia as its, relationship with the United States has worsened in recent months, John.
Jomana Kurace, who was CNN in Turkey and joined us a couple of hours ago. Let's go to Hawaii now, where residents have driven through clouds of sulphur and over roads splitting open to make what could be last visits home before another eruption by the Kilauea volcano. There are now 12 fissures or large cracks in and around the Leilani Estate subdivision on the Big Island of Hawaii. Lava flows have destroyed dozens of houses and vehicles, with many still in danger. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of this. Lava flows moving. It's unbelievable. Volcanologists say there is just no way of knowing where or when the next fissure will open up. Officials this afternoon say the lava flows have stopped for the time being. CNN's Brigitte Namata is on the Big Islands.
Officials, including Governor David Ige, warn the community to stay on their toes, be prepared to evacuate at a moment's notice.
We don't believe this is the end of it. Geologists continue to say that the rift zone is still inflated, so we continue to be vigilant and be prepared.
Civil Defense warned residents the lava flow is emitting dangerous sulfur dioxide, and it's currently monitoring the air quality. There are reports of looting in Leilani Estates as lava continues to destroy homes, something the county warned will not be tolerated. The county also issued passes for those who live at Leilani Estates so they can go back to their homes and retrieve belongings, a process many say would have been helpful on the day Kilauea first erupted.
It was very terrible the last couple of days. Folks waited for hours to get in, and it was, tempers were flaring.
Andy Andrews describes these last few days as stressful and uncertain. Though Andy hasn't lost his home, it's a possibility he is mentally preparing for.
It's a really terrible feeling now because some of us have lost our homes and some of us haven't. And so depending where you stand on that side of that divide, it's a completely different relationship with this as either something that might happen or something that did happen. I gave a guy a ride-in yesterday, and we were hoping to get to his home for him to get things out, and as we arrived, his home was in flames, and it was just gut-wrenching.
Though he tells me there is one good thing that has come from this.
There's some wonderful community energy that's coming together around this. It's a shame it takes a tragedy for it to happen, but you live long enough and you find out that hardship brings people together, and so there's been some incredible generosity and kindness around it too.
What a nice note to end that report from CNN on. Let's go to Otago and actually Otaki as well. Two Otago mayors say they are gutted the government won't step in and save Roxburgh's children's village. The facility is run by Stand Children's Services, and along with one in Otaki is on the chopping block as Stand needs $3 million to keep them open. The government says there's no money left, but 380 traumatised kids will miss out on going through their doors every year if they close. Our Otago Southern reporter Timothy Brown has this story.
Mayoral brothers Brian and Tim Cadogan met with the Prime Minister, the Minister for Children and the Chief Executive of Oranga Tamariki in the hope an 11th hour plea might save Roxburgh Children's Village. But despite arguing the merits of the facility and a lack of similar services in the entire region south of the Waitaki River, Clutha Mayor Brian Cadogan says the government won't budge.
I say that we're deflated. I think we had a fair hearing from the Prime Minister, but unfortunately we were unable to divert the trajectory of where it's heading.
A decision on the village's future will be made next Tuesday. Brian Cadogan says he does have some sympathy for the government's position.
One commonality that we've had in recent weeks is we've dealt with helicopters, Lumsden Maternity, West Otago Health and now Roxburgh Health Campus. All the services are stretched out like a violin string, and it all comes down to a decade of strangulation and befeebling of finances by the freezing and withdrawal of government funding.
In 2009, the national government gave an additional $1.5 million to Stand to keep the camp alive. The shortfall was $5 million then. It was expected another $1.5 million would come the following year, but it didn't, nor did it in any of the subsequent 7 years. But now, National Spokesperson for Children, Alfred Naro, is calling on the government to save the villages. He says National stepped up during Stand's time of need, and Labor should do the same.
We took responsibility then, in 2009. I think it's now for the current government today to also take up some responsibility with that too.
Alfred Naro says conversations around the future of the organisation need to be had once it's secured. Stan's chief executive, Dr Fiona Inkpen, says without government intervention, the two villages will be forced to close. She says that decision may have long-lasting repercussions for the affected children.
I hope that Oranga Tamariki and the Minister have looked very closely at the view that they hold, that there are adequate services and that there are services that do what we do in the region, because we have to agree to disagree. From our perspective, there are no alternative services for this particular service.
Stand runs 7 villages, but if Roxburgh and Otaki close, Christchurch will be the only one left open in the South Island. As next Tuesday approaches, Central Otago Mayor Tim Cadogan says the reality of closure is starting to bite.
At the end of the day, the Prime Minister gave an assurance that they're going to do all they can to make sure that those children are safe. From my viewpoint, we've gone all the way to the very top. There's nowhere left to go, really, and that is hurting.
But his brother, Brian Cadogan, still holds out hope.
Can you ever turn your back on children that are vulnerable? If they go to Christchurch, that's a pretty long stretch. If they were to go to the North Island, you might as well put a wee spacesuit on them and send them to Mars, because it's just not on.
For Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
The Prime Minister's office referred RNZ's questions about the future of the Roxburgh Children's Village to the Minister for Children, Tracy Martin. In a statement, the Minister says if the Roxburgh Village closes, which is a matter for Stand and still under consultation, children in the lower South Island will still have a range of support services available. Tracy Martin met with local mayors in Dunedin last week and again today in Wellington to address their concerns about what happens if Stand does close that village. She says Oranga Tamariki will monitor the 21 children who at any time would have been in the village to ensure there is no gap in their support. Right, 6:25. The Australian Parliament's been rocked by the resignation of 5 politicians, 1 senator and 4 MPs. The resignations follow a ruling from the High Court regarding the dual citizenship of Senator Katie Gallagher. She's out because she failed to renounce her British citizenship in time. The others, who are all lower house MPs, saw the writing on the wall and took the opportunity to step down. The ABC's Lucy Barber is at Parliament House in Canberra, of course.
Katie Gallagher was a British citizen when she nominated for the last federal election, so that is a breach of Section 44 of the Constitution. Her lawyers argued that she took all reasonable steps to renounce her citizenship and that she shouldn't be punished because of the British Public Service taking longer than she would have liked to formally register her renunciation. But the court today found that wasn't a good enough argument and it has struck her out. As a result of that, there has been a spate of resignations here in Parliament today. 3 from Labor, Susan Lamb, Justine Kay and Josh Wilson, plus Rebecca Sharkey, a crossbencher from the Centre Alliance Party. Now, Rebecca Sharkey has resigned knowing the court would most likely rule her ineligible if she referred herself. So her resignation will trigger a by-election in the South Australian seat of Mayo.
No matter that I put my application in before the election was even called, no matter that my documents came back before the election was held, the High Court ruling in Gallagher, I believe, is quite clear. Consequently, I will resign from the Australian Parliament today and seek re-election at the forthcoming by-election, which I believe the earliest can be the 16th of June, and I would hope it would be that date.
Justine Kay, who together with the other 2 Labor MPs, Josh Wilson and Susan Lamb, announced her resignation in the House of Representatives. Justine Kay has been the Labor member for Braddon in Tasmania.
Today, the High Court has set a new precedent. This is a new rule, and I respect this rule without qualification. As a consequence of today's decision, I will be resigning my seat as the federal member for Braddon. I will be writing to you, Mr Speaker, to advise you of my resignation.
This will be a big morale booster for the federal government. We have to point out that the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has maintained that the federal election will be held in the first half of next year. We'll have to wait and see if that changes.
Lucy Barber in Canberra. I just got a text, and don't forget, Trump's decision is also sad for many New Zealanders with family in Iran. There are many that life is so hard for right now, family and loved ones who are struggling with severe economic ramifications of this decision. Thank you, and thanks for all your texts tonight. Lots again from Christchurch, and we will respond to some of you. Right, just before we go, for many men and some women, losing their hair is a major cause of upset, with some spending thousands of dollars trying to fix it. But scientists working at the University of Manchester in Britain, of course, just in case you didn't know where Manchester was, believe they have found a cure for baldness. The BBC's Charlotte Gallagher reports.
The researchers believe that an experimental drug originally designed to treat brittle bone disease could be a revolutionary new treatment for baldness. In experiments, the medication had a dramatic effect on follicles, causing them to sprout fresh hairs. The lead scientist, Dr. Nathan Hawkshaw, was stunned by the results.
When I saw the hair follicles grow in culture, and after 2 days you saw a significant difference in the amount of hair shaft being produced, it was exciting. Hopefully, with future clinical trials, we'll be able to identify if topical treatment will be possible to treat hair loss.
The scientists experimented with other medications before they realised this particular osteoporosis drug could be the cure they'd been searching for. Currently in Britain, there are only 2 drugs available to treat male and female pattern baldness. Both often produce disappointing results. This new potential treatment will have to go through clinical trials before it's made available to the public, but the scientists involved in the discovery say it could one day make a real difference to people suffering with hair loss.
And that report from Manchester in Britain ends Checkpoint in New Zealand for tonight. Thank you for being with us. Have a wonderful evening. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Auckland Transport doesn't expect Britomart Station to reopen until late tomorrow morning after this morning's derailment. Malcolm Rewa is to be tried a 3rd time over the killing of Susan Burdett after the judge upheld the Attorney General's decision to lift the stay of proceedings. The school parole system, Novopay, is being overhauled ahead of a likely failure of the online system after the end of next year. And the Anglican Church has agreed to bless same-sex relationships in a decision which could be strongly opposed by some Polynesian Anglicans. Our next news and weather at 7.
This week on Are We There Yet?
I had 2 that didn't get on very well, and then I stuck them in the same room, and now they're getting on really well.
Sibling rivalry.
You get a little bit of one-upsmanship, I've got a higher score on this video game.
What we can learn from our brothers and sisters.
Adjusting to siblings can be a good model